I bet you didn't know these creepy facts that'll give you nightmares. Hallucinations come in very different forms. People who are beginning to go blind see very realistic and very absurd hallucinations. This is called Charles Bonnet syndrome. In one case, a woman was diagnosed with glaucoma. Her life was very normal until a trip to the grocery store triggered her hallucinations. The shelves would begin to drip and turn into thick mud. She could pull an item off the shelf, but the mud was too thick for her to actually put the item back. These hallucinations can become so vivid that people can see animals or vivid landscapes without them actually being there. In ancient China, there was a process where they would mummify people with honey. In order to do this, an elderly person would volunteer themselves. They'd usually already be pretty close to death. They would begin binge bathing in honey and only be given honey to eat. They waited until their entire digestive system was just full of honey. Then, when the volunteer died, they would be covered in honey for 100 years. After a century or so, the contents were turned into candy and said to heal broken bones. The Black Death was a pretty big deal centuries ago, and there's a reason it became an epidemic. The bacteria that's responsible for the Black Plague is unable to survive outside the body of its victims, but it has a secret weapon. It can disable its host's immune system. With nothing to oppose it, it can multiply quickly and overrun its victim very, very, very rapidly. Like, I'm talking about within hours. No one actually knows how Edgar Allan Poe died. All of his death records have been lost. Poe was just found in Baltimore's streets. Eerily, he was wearing someone else's clothes. He was in pretty bad shape. I mean, there's literally nothing left from his medical records. There's no copy of his death certificate. There are many speculations about how he actually died. I mean, he was only 40 years old. A lot of people don't know that Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street was inspired by a true story. It was published by the LA Times. A young boy suffered horrific nightmares and actually died in the middle of one. Wes Craven said, the boy told his parents he was afraid to sleep, that if he slept, the thing chasing him would get him. So he tried staying awake days at a time. When he finally fell asleep, his parents thought the crisis was over. Then they heard screams in the middle of the night. By the time they got to him, he was already dead. He died while having a nightmare. The marriage between Joanna of Castile and Philip the Handsome of Burgundy was a very interesting one. When Philip died, Joanne refused to let him go. I mean, literally. She would not let them bury his body. And finally, his father and the government had to step in, demanding that she allow them to bury him. Their separation did not last long. She had Philip's body exhumed. From that moment, everywhere that Joanna went, Philip went with her. Usually the coffin was kept closed. After a few years, she finally let them bury Philip again. But it had to be directly outside of her window. There are over 250,000 deaths a year due to medical error. That's because doctors' handwriting is so sloppy, a prescription is put in wrong, or something is done wrong during a surgery. So doctors actually sometimes end up killing their patients on accident. There was once a case where a man was complaining of issues in his lungs. They thought it was a tumor. When they went to go investigate it, they were horrified to realize he had inhaled a pine seed and had a tree growing in his lungs. Criminologists estimate that at least 200,000 murders have gone unsolved since the 1950s. There's a 1 in 3 chance police will never identify your killer if you are murdered. If the sun exploded, you wouldn't know it for at least 8 minutes. The energy from the explosion would be traveling at the speed of light, which means it would take about 8 minutes and 20 seconds until it hit Earth. 20% of children report hearing voices. Some say it's explained by having an imaginary friend. Some people say young children are more in tune with the afterlife. A homicide expert has determined that there is likely to be over 2,000 active serial killers at large right now. According to the same guy, there are 27,000 murders that aren't even in FBI files. Former chief of FBI's elite serial crime unit said in 2015, a very conservative estimate is that there are between 25 and 50 active serial killers in the United States. There are about 40 supervolcanoes around the world. They are capable of taking billions of lives. And we're about 24,000 years overdue for an eruption. One supervolcano in Yellowstone National Park has a magma chamber that Tokyo could fit inside of. There is a brain-eating amoeba that lives inside lakes and rivers in the United States. The single-celled organism travels up the nose, right directly into the brain, where it starts to break down the tissue. Sudden arrhythmic death syndrome, also known as SADS, is where you literally just drop dead. A seemingly healthy person just dies for no reason. It's pretty much the adult version of SIDS. Over 80 million bacteria are exchanged with just one kiss. People who are in long-term relationships are more likely to have the same type of bacteria in their mouths as each other. Botflies are a type of fly larva who burrow under your skin. A botfly will land on its host and bury its egg into the skin. When it hatches, you can see the larva moving around under the skin. About 1 in 50 people in the United States of America have an unruptured brain aneurysm right now. That's about 6.5 million people. Speaking of which, a brain aneurysm ruptures every 18 minutes. Around 30,000 people suffer from a brain aneurysm rupture a year. There are over 200 dead bodies on Mount Everest. Because retrieving them is such a risk, they serve as markers for hikers, and it's got an eerie name. It's called Rainbow Valley from their colorful clothing marking the way. Horned lizards shoot blood out of their eyes as a defense mechanism. Their eyes have very thin blood vessels, and when they're feeling threatened, they close their eyes and flex their eye muscles, which causes those vessels to burst, shooting blood out of their eyes. It also supposedly smells terrible, and it also can be used to get debris out of their eyes. There is a type of moth that drinks blood. Vampire moths feed on human and animal blood. They can suck blood for up to 50 minutes. When you die, your pet will probably try to eat you, especially your house cat. Without you around and nobody to feed your pet, they're going to go for the closest meal. And that's going to be you. Speaking of weird facts dealing with pets, dogs love toys that squeak because they mimic the sound of squealing prey as they're attacking it. There's a theory as to why they rip the squeakers out of their toys. Because as long as it's squeaking, it's still alive. You swallow 1 to 2 cups of your own snot every single day. That's over 22 gallons a year. The average bed has between 100,000 and 10 million dust mites. That's a pretty big gap right there. But don't worry, dust mites only worry about eating your dead skin flakes. On average, you sweat up to 26 gallons of sweat in your bed every year. That means you sweat a little bit over a cup every single day. The air you breathe at the train station or at the airport is 15% human skin. I wonder if that's why it has that distinct smell. Speaking of skin, you'll shed about 40 pounds of skin in your lifetime. And your skin can shed at the rate of 500 million cells a day. Cockroaches have been recording eating human flesh, both living and dead, as well as fingernails, eyelashes, feet, and hands. 20% of coffee cups have traces of fecal matter on them. It is widely believed that when you die, your hearing is the last sense to go. Oh, and the dead outnumber the living 15 to 1. In 1968, the dead outnumbered the living 29 to 1. There was a headless chicken named Mike. When Mike was beheaded, it wasn't a clean cut. The bulk of his head was removed, but they missed his jugular. He was left with one ear, most of his brainstem intact, which is how Mike was able to go on living. His owners actually fed him with a little eyedropper. He lived for 18 months. When threatened, Fulmar chicks vomit a stinky, sticky orange oil on predators. It glues the predator's feathers together. That way they can't fly. When the predatory bird tries to wash off the oil in the ocean, it finds it's lost its buoyancy and drowns. Every unborn baby grows a mustache in the womb, which then spreads to cover the entire body. The baby then eats the fine hair and makes it their first bowel movement after birth. Meat is treated with carbon monoxide to make it look fresh. The carbon monoxide is what preserves the color and the freshness. 2 million tons of human waste is discharged into our water systems every single day. Think about how much that is a year. It takes 27,000 trees every single day to make toilet paper. It's amazing that we have any trees left at this point. On average, an adult has produced enough spit in their lifetime to fill up 2 full-size swimming pools. There are over 18 million vacant homes in the United States. With the estimated population of homeless people, there's enough vacant homes for every homeless person to have 6 homes. You have 1,458 species of bacteria living in your belly button. Everyone's little ecosystem in their belly button is unique, just like their fingerprint. One guy's belly button harbored the same bacteria as a soil in Japan, but he had never been to Japan. A cell phone, the one you probably have in your hand right now, has 18 times more bacteria on it than a public bathroom. During World War II, an American plane crashed on a Japanese island. There were 9 men on board. 8 of them were captured and eaten. The one man who was rescued was George H.W. Bush. Also, turns out beef eaters use 100 times more land resources than plant-based eaters do.